It's official. You go by Kate Deering. Is it Dr. Kate or is it, what do
Nope.
you call yourself? Or what do you
Well,
like people to call you?
just, I just go by Kate. There's no official, I mean, I have certifications in a lot of different things, but I don't have utilize any of those. So, I mean, I'm a certified nutritional coach. I mean, I have tons of different certifications in nutrition. But quite honestly, what I teach now is a little bit of just self-learning. You start to learn that a lot of these other protocols or practices don't work for a lot of people. And until I kind of understood the body better and understood how it functions, and it's kind of a little different than what the medical space tells you, then that's kind of where my practice went and has gone.
Cool. Well, welcome, Kate,
Thank you.
to Candy by Candace. That is my coaching practice. And I'd love to start with having you share a little bit more about yourself, personal things, like anything you'd like us to know that make you who you are, and then your background. And I'm thinking if we took 5 to 10 minutes in different segments, we'll get it all in and we'll
Sure.
take about 30. So I'll hand
Yeah.
it over to you.
Yeah, so I have been in the health and fitness world pretty much my entire life. So that's about 28, well, 28 working years. So out of college, I got into, and I used to run health clubs back in Atlanta.
Okay.
And so I've been in this space. I've done everything from sell and utilize fitness equipment to running health clubs to personal training to teaching boot camps, to transitioning into nutritional coaching, and then going into more of a holistic space, and then to the metabolic space, and then now here I am. So it's been a lot of years of like learning about people and what has worked, and certainly what hasn't worked, and maybe what has worked temporarily and then makes them worse. And so the last 12 years, my practice kind of transitioned, because when I hit my late 30s, the things I was doing wasn't really working for me any longer. And I was an extreme exerciser. I taught boot camps, I trained, I did endurance athletes. I was a very clean eater, probably more lower carb at that point in time. And it worked until it didn't work. And things just started going sideways for me. And that could have been, there was some weight gain, there's sleep issues, there was hormonal issues. I just didn't really feel at my best. And I started to think, well, I guess this is what people say when you hit your 40s, that things just start going.
Yeah.
And and so my first responses was just to kind of get tighter with everything, like train harder and be cleaner. And it became a very obsessive and unhealthy approach eventually, because when you start to do that, and start restricting even more, actually what it does to your metabolism, it actually starts having these adaptive pathways, and it slows down even more when you
Can
start
I
doing that.
can I just share with you, which is what I was going to tell you a few minutes
Mhm.
ago, is that as we get older, I mean, I'm 100% agreeing with you, I guess is what I'm saying. Your metabolism slows down, you start to create more cortisol, you start to put on a few more pounds, that induces more stress, more hormone release in the body. And then you are like, I'm going to work out even harder and I'm going to go crazy and I'm going to work in, Orange Theory 5 days a week. And then that's more stress on the body. And then you're trying to raise a family or travel for work or do your normal stuff. And the world is crazy anyways. And then you're adding more stress. And so I think that's where I ended up, is it was like too much. I mean, when I went through what I went through, which was stage 2 breast cancer, and I'm lovely and wonderful today. Like there's no concern, but it was a good learning, right? What I learned, I did my genetic testing, took away all these things and basically cut it all off. I do yoga and hiking and some dance and some Pilates. No more orange. I don't even want to walk into an Orange Theory, like the part of, because it used to stress me out to get there anyways. And now I'm like, I understand. And then losing weight, lost a lot of weight and it was just naturally came right off. Um, and I'm better for it, which is crazy.
Yeah.
I so I'll hand it back to you, but, like, I hear you. Like, and we grew up in the same era, so I did the whole, managing wellness centers and doing all that, and, if there's I think people are so much more ahead now than they used to be. Like, we were learning as we went. There weren't all of these disciplines and education that there is today, and I certainly would have done genetic testing 30 years ago if it was something that I could have done, so
Yeah. Well, I do think, I mean, in the broad sense of probably if you look at just our entire planet or our entire country, you know, we obviously have an obesity epidemic. We have people that are overweight. And certainly for a good bit of the population, it's, yeah, you probably don't need to eat as much and you probably should move more. And those are some basic information that we tell people that for a good bit of people that will absolutely work. For other individuals, and certainly when we start tacking on tons of stress into our bodies, there's another variable that isn't talked about or we don't consider. And essentially because how our body functions, it functions especially when we reference metabolism, it functions in a healthy metabolism where your basically lead hormones are like thyroid hormone and it's running optimally and you're burning lots of energy, but you're using that to keep all your metabolic functions in check, meaning your body uses a considerable amount of energy to run your body. You're not running most of your body through your exercise or your daily work or any of that. You're running most of the energy that goes through you and you're using it to just run your body. And that's breathing and just keeping your muscles and your bones and detoxing and all of the functions your body does is basically your metabolism. The sum of every chemical process that goes on is what your energy burns or your metabolic rate. And essentially, the bottom line is how your body is converting that food that you consume into energy is essentially how metabolism works. Now, your body can go into dysfunction of many different spaces when you're trying to do that process. When you actually try to take food and produce energy, there's a lot of dysfunction that can happen. So when we go back to, again, we have a healthy metabolism that's run through thyroid function and having enough nutrition and energy and food. That is where it's good, producing a high amount of fuel and everything's running optimally. And then we have something that I say is your stressed metabolism, which can also actually burn a lot of calories. And that's kind of what we do, I think, in our 20s and 30s. And then we start to do our Orange Theories and all these high intensity workouts and train like crazy. And we essentially stress the crap out of our body. And, you know, we can lose weight in that space. Certainly, we burn a lot extra calories. However, if we continually stay in that space, and as we age, we get more sensitive to stress, we kind of tip it over. And when we kind of use these modalities like training and excessive exercise to kind of rev things up externally, what happens is our metabolic functions, all the things that our body uses to run properly and the amount of energy it uses to run properly starts to decrease. And that shows up as symptoms. So what we'll start to notice is our body temperature becomes a lot lower. Our pulse actually becomes lower. We start to lose hair, or our hair doesn't grow as well. Our skin doesn't look as good. We have a really hard time gaining muscle, and then we have a hard time losing fat. We might have digestive issues, constipation, or even diarrhea. We start to have a lot of premenstrual issues, or infertility is another thing. We have horrible menopausal symptoms. So all of those things are symptoms of a metabolic rate that is not properly fueled. And what have we been telling? So at that place, then modern medicine says, well, you should just diet more, or maybe train more, or do more, and that's going to help you. And what women and men are actually finding is it's making them feel worse. And it doesn't mean that they might not still have excess body fat, because they could. You can still have a low metabolic rate and have a lot of extra body fat. And unfortunately, when the body's metabolism is low, you would think, well, I have all this excess fat on me. Why can't it just use that? Well, because you've trained it to adapt to these stressful mechanisms, and now it's being trained to just hold on to everything. So you have to actually go through a process where you improve your basal metabolic rate so that your body actually learns to use fuel better so it can function more optimally, while also eventually helping you lose some of that extra body fat. But that doesn't come in a 30, 60, 90-day program. That comes in time.
So when somebody is, so the big question for me is, I'm someone who's, doing all the right things.
Mm-hmm.
Who's the candidate? What are they going through right now that, makes them a candidate for this type of, I guess, for lack of a better word, diagnosis?
Well, not a doctor here, so I don't diagnose anybody. But when you just look at metabolism, once you understand what it does, right? So if your metabolism is the sum of every metabolic process, then we can look at, well, what does a healthy person with a healthy metabolism look like? Well, they're warm. So they'll have a body temperature of 98.6. They'll have a pulse between 75 and 90 beats a minute. They'll be able to sleep through the night. They have a daily bowel movement with a normal bowels, not like loose. They're not constipated. They have a pain-free period. If they're a woman, they actually have a sex drive. If they're a man or a woman, their menopausal symptoms are very limited hot flashes, limited all those things that they're experiencing. They don't experience anxiety or depression. I'm not saying there isn't other reasonings for that, but you basically have a generalized decent mood. You have good energy throughout the day. You are able to maintain body weight without excessive exercise or extreme dieting. Your skin and hair look nice. So basically what we think of as healthy or a healthy person, and not just that they're, skin and bones and they're small, but they have health, they look healthy essentially. But these are kind of subjective markers that you can look for, and you can ask yourself, right? Like, am I having a daily bowel movement? How many times am I peeing through the day, right? A day healthy, about 5 or 6. If you're peeing 15 times a day, not ideal. If you're waking up all throughout the night, not ideal. If you can't get to sleep at night, those are all symptoms of a metabolism that is not properly fueled. So if we understand that what is a healthy person, then we can look over here and like, well, are you having symptoms? And that'd be cold body, right? Are you have cold hands, cold feet? Is your body temperature running in the 96, 97 degrees? And that's Fahrenheit. Are you having a very low pulse? Because that's also be a sign. And we're always told, well, if you're really fit, you will have a low pulse, which is absolutely true. You will. A low pulse is a sign of fitness. It is not a sign of good metabolic function. So you can be super fit and you can still have some deficiencies in metabolic function. I see it all the time in endurance athletes. You'll start to see super high cholesterol in them. You start to see they have sleep issues. They have no libido. They have a loss of periods if they're a woman. So there's a lot of other symptoms we can look at. It's not just they look fit and lean and that means they're healthy. It's not necessarily true. So, so for also just another is little dry hair, dry skin, poor digestion, lots of PMS issues. Those are all going to be signs that somebody has some maybe dysfunction going on.
And now, are these women or men that are slightly overweight where they haven't reached obesity, or is it kind of give me an idea of what that might look like? And the reason why I ask is because when you have, insulin resistance, or you start to look at type 2 diabetes, there's other factors that come in. So I'm just trying to see kind of where that looks, because, listeners are thinking, okay, I might have this. I've got these things. I'm just curious where this falls into the weight.
You can be underweight and you can be overweight if you have right. And some people think, so I'll have people contact me and they'll be like, I'm actually underweight, but I have a lot of the symptoms that you're talking about. And what I would say is, okay, you're probably running in that stressed metabolism. And in a stressed metabolism, you can still be burning a good amount of calories. Adrenaline and high cortisol will burn a ton of calories. And so those people will usually have a hard time putting on muscle or even gaining weight because they're just in that stress system all the time. They're burning a high amount of calories, but that's also going to interrupt their sleep, how they digest, their libido, how they feel all day. So usually though, and of course you can just look at our population and see the majority of people are normally overweight. And that normally is, because they've gone through these adaptive pathways, because anytime your body goes into stress, your body's like, oh, hey, this person is going to start burning more calories. We're going to adapt because we don't want you to consume all your muscle tissue. So we're going to adapt by slowing down your metabolic functions. So that's that part of you that usually should be burning about 70% of your calories just by running the body starts to slow down. And it does this by slowing things like digestion down, or you might get brain fog, or you just don't have good energy all day because now your body's like, we're not going to convert that fuel into energy for you to utilize because you're trying to use it in all these other things externally, like working all the time or partying or whatever that is. And so over time, what you see happening is people lower metabolic function, and then they start to try to feel better, and they don't make good food choices, and then they slowly start gaining a little bit of body weight, right? Which usually comes in fat. And then if they try to stress that weight off again, which is what we've been told to do, go eat less and go work out more, what tends to happen is they will lose some body fat, But anytime you go into those deficits, you will burn off a percentage of your muscle tissue. So they go through that process, they lose some weight, but they've also then lose a little bit of muscle. And if they don't try to fix that and put and train and do it properly, over time, what you'll see is they lose muscle, they put on body fat. And what do we know about muscle as we age? It's a very valuable resource. It burns more calories than fat. And so we want more muscle. But every diet they go on takes a little bit away, takes a little bit away. So over time, they've put on 50 pounds of fat and they've lost 20 pounds of muscle. And that now to fix that isn't going to be overnight. That can take years and good training and good eating to shift that back into putting on muscle and losing fat.
You've talked about activities and you've said the word stress, the activities that cause it. From my own experience, I know just how impactful that can be. Would you say that the stress in whatever form is really at the root of this?
I would say that stress is probably the root of most metabolic functions. And when I say stress, I usually say stress is anytime the body cannot meet its demands, meaning there's more demands placed on the body than you are able to take care of, either energetically, nutritionally, so forth. And that's going to produce a stress response in the body because the body's saying, I don't have enough resources. So I'm going to break down some of your tissue or bone or whatever so I can get what I need. And the body's looking for that somewhere to try to regulate. So your body is the bank of a lot of things, right? A lot of minerals, your calcium, right? I mean, what happens as we age? Well, women especially go through osteopenia, osteoporosis, because bones are our mineral banks. And every time we go into stress, if we're not ingesting enough of these minerals, they say, well, we have some in reserve. We'll break that down and try to utilize things. So your body's trying to always create this homeostatic state. Unfortunately, sometimes to get there, it creates and it breaks down things to get there. Because again, the number one thing your body wants to do is stay alive. It's not interested in, having a baby. That's not number one. It's like number 10. Right? It's not even interested in digesting. That's far down on the totem pole.
Absolutely,
right. It's
100%.
Survival. And so it will constantly try and figure out how to do it through these adaptive processes to get there. And they're there to keep you alive. Like we need them. Because if we didn't, we'd be dead. But because of it, they'll create this breakdown. And because we don't give ourselves enough time to recover and then eat and to nourish, we just keep breaking down until you hit symptoms, which get to disease state, which get to, so forth and so on.
Now, age, let's talk about that. We know where we are or about, right? But is there a time frame in which somebody needs to start thinking about this type of overload on the body, stress on, because I didn't notice things until, I was always going 100 miles an hour. So it wasn't like in my 20s, it was fine. I was good. And then it was 30s. I always had really intense periods, but I was fine. Like you just kept, you know what I mean? Like all I'm saying is that for those listeners out there, when is that little teeny switch? It's not necessarily 40 and I'm in. Is it mid 30s? Is it 50? Or what are you looking for?
I think it's instead of looking at age, I think you look at the symptoms, right? So maybe in your 30s, you're like, I was good, but I was starting to have heavy periods. Then I would say that's a symptom. So sometimes things start percolating, but because, especially if you're like somebody that's driven, like you just don't see it. You got blinders on because you're just like, I got to get that done. Yeah. And so things start percolating and we just don't pay attention to them because maybe it's not really affecting us that much, right? Maybe the sleep's not as great, or maybe our periods aren't as great, or maybe something's happening, but we don't pay attention to it yet because maybe we don't know to pay attention to it yet, right? We don't know.
That's, I think, the biggest thing is people don't know what they don't know until they're faced. And why that's significant is that, and why I was so grateful is that I'd always been a healthy person, but I'd been a very busy, healthy person. And so when I was faced with something, I was actually grateful because it was I know it wasn't exactly catching it early, but it's something that if I would have known that, I would have seen that years before. Does that make sense? And so I want people to recognize these things in their 30s, way beyond getting to the point where, your body just naturally starts to feel it anyways, and then you're really in for it. So
Yeah.
that's why I was asking about
Yeah.
age.
And I can tell you when I kind of started utilizing this work, and I've done it for about 12 years now. When I first started, the majority of my clientele was between 40 and 60. I
Mhm.
see a lot more 20-year-olds now and 30-year-olds because A, they're becoming more aware. They realize that having a horrible period is not normal. I mean, it might be normal because a lot of people have it, but it's
Yes.
not normal.
Yeah.
And so they're learning, like, okay, I actually have control over these things, right? You don't just, because right now, what do? Go to the doctor, they're like, want to put you on the pill. Take the
Exactly.
pill, that'll help you. And for some it will, but what is it doing to you? And can you correct it through diet and exercise, or just the right nourishing foods? And you absolutely can. And if we learn to tune into our bodies and just don't focus on like our external body and our physique and so forth, which is what I focused on for 38 years. I didn't know to really focus on anything else.
Exactly.
I didn't correlate it. You should have, but I didn't. I was like, I can, whatever. Um, I'll just take this if I'm constipated, more coffee. I mean, it was just, I didn't really understand it. I just took something to alleviate it. I didn't understand that it was my body trying to tell me something. And so when I started to learn that, and I'm like, holy cow, when I started my process, I was like, remember taking my temperature and I'm like, I'm 96 degrees. I was cold. And I'm like, I'm like an athlete, that I was super healthy. And then I
Yeah.
was like, wow, what do I need to do to get myself warmer? And when I went through the process, what happened is, because again, I'm not here to diagnose people, and I'm not here to say this thing is going to fix that disorder. What I am going to say is following this way of eating will help warm your body up. It'll help produce a better energetic state. And when you get into a better energetic state, symptoms decrease.
Yeah. So what other, like if somebody's going through this from the beginning, right? They've kind of started this process. What's their first 30, 60, 90 days look like? Not that it takes that long. We know that it's a lifetime change, right? And it's being more aware. But what does that first few months of their process look like?
So if you're entering into the pro-metabolic space or the bioenergetic space, this is a lot of different terms that it's reference. And again, all what we're trying to do is teach your body to utilize fuel better so you can have more fuel available for your internal functions, right? And so when people start, the first thing you want to do is figure out where you're at. Like, what are you eating, right? What are
Yeah.
you doing? And
Yeah.
because it's hard to give direction without having a starting point. And
Okay.
so for me personally, I tell people, look, go join Chronometer or My Fitness Pal or some sort of food logging app, because it's going to be more specific with you about what you're eating, when you're eating it, what are your macronutrients, how much carbs or protein and fat are you consuming. And so it gives you a idea of what you're starting with. Because
Okay.
if you're starting from a low carbohydrate approach and you're hearing me tell you carbohydrates are good, and then all of a sudden you just go and eat a ton of carbohydrates, you're not going to get a good result.
Okay.
And so when you go into this space, it's a slow and steady shift. It's not here, eat this and you're going to be good. It's
Right.
start here what you're doing and then slowly start adding things. Maybe it's, do you change your breakfast a little bit? You add a little bit more carbohydrates in your breakfast, and then you assess. And
Yeah.
it's taking things like temperature and pulse, and then paying attention to the subjective measures like your sleep, your energy, your digestion, your period, your sex drive. Like all of those are measurements that you can pay attention to daily to
Yeah.
see if you're getting better.
Yep.
And the temperature and pulse, like people all of a sudden, I actually feel warmer. Hear it all the time. I'm not cold in the winter anymore.
Right.
Everyone else is freezing. I totally am fine. And I'm like, okay, those are all means we're moving in the right direction, because ultimately what we're doing is we're taking people's whatever they're eating, and some need to eat less. A lot of people I find are just under eating the right foods. And then we slowly take you from maybe 1,200 calories upwards of 2,000 calories, because maybe that's what your body needs to function optimally. But
Well,
if you
let
do
me
it in a week, you're not going to get a good result.
so one of the things I chose to do post treatment was I opted out of the prescriptions that they want you to take, because to me it's just masking something. And so I lost the weight, changed my diet, changed everything. Stress was like the number one thing on my mind. But I have to, the whole goal of the pills were to eliminate or reduce as much estrogen as possible because I had a positive.
Yeah.
So
So
my,
they got like tamoxifen or something, right?
well,
That kind
yeah,
of.
and I've never taken them. I'm
Mhm.
thriving. I'm great.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I have so little estrogen that I'm always cold. I'm always, you know what I mean? Like it's just the way that my body operates. And so my question is, does this conversation change depending on maybe what type of like a circumstance like I might be in? Does somebody have to take those things into account when you're looking at those tracking, the temperature and those types of things of the
Well,
body?
I would tell you if you're always cold, it has nothing to do with estrogen. I would first say that to you.
Okay.
Yeah, estrogen is not a, I mean, and it depends on how you see estrogen. Like I see estrogen as more of a stress or shock hormone because it
Mhm.
elevates under stress. And you might not see it as much in your blood because as we age, obviously our ovaries aren't producing as much estrogen, but your tissue can produce estrogen, right? Your body fat produces estrogen within it. And
Mhm.
under stress, your body will turn more of your androgenic hormones like testosterone into estrogen within the tissue. And that's when it's going to create the problems within a woman or man, right? Men have a lot of cancers that are driven by estrogen as well.
Mhm.
So, so as a woman ages, your blood estrogens will actually show, obviously, like estradiol will be much lower because your ovaries stop producing it. But your body, I assure you, is still producing estrogen. What
Yeah.
it's not producing is primarily progesterone. So there's no balance there with it. And so that's where women will start to see a lot of menstrual irregularities and so forth. And so the question is, if you are, certainly every person is taken as an individual. And if you have
Right.
certain symptoms, right, you've recovered from cancer or you have IBS, or I mean, there's a plethora of things that somebody could experience. And again, I'm not here to go, I'm not a doctor, I don't
Of
diagnose.
course. Of
What
course.
I do though is we're going to work on trying to improve your energy production, and everyone might start at a different space, like from what they're currently doing, or maybe they need a, you know, it's also kind of a lifetime thing. As you've said, you know, I had to change my life, right? There was too much stress going on. So
Yep.
that's part of it, right? You can't just eat a good diet and live in a stressful life and expect a really good result. It's not going to happen.
Yep.
And so, especially when we come to healing, right? If you want to like instant weight loss, sure, you could like calorie deficit and be stressed out and you will lose weight, but you're eventually going to feel like crap.
Mhm.
So the question then is, yes, hormonal function, where a person is in their life, what is going on, all of those things have to be taken into consideration. This is certainly no blanket approach to everybody. And it may be even different about what foods might be recommended to you, depending on how well you digest and process foods.
Yeah.
And so if you don't digest certain foods very well, even though I might like them, I'm not going to recommend them to you until I get you into a better space. But I
Right.
always say to people, look, the diet we start with will not be the diet we end with. It's going
Right.
to change and
Of
shift
course.
as we progress. And it's not just here, do this. It's we have to shift, and then you'll create some awareness, and then we kind of go to a different space and level.
Yeah. I would have to agree. But the cold thing, I would have to tell you, like, it's the major change I've seen since this shift. And
Yeah,
it's because a lot of my, like, you know, I don't know how else to explain it. It's just that my whole life changed almost overnight. Well, not overnight, probably within the next 3 to 6 months following the end of treatment. And I'm not using it as the base for everyone. I'm just using it as, my only perception of it because that's where I happen to be. But I will tell you that since eliminating it and doing all the things to reduce it or eliminate it has I feel way better than I've ever felt, but I am always cold. And when I mean cold, I mean, I was always very warm. Wasn't that weird? Like I was always very heated, very warm, very intense. And now that I've kind of mellowed out and I've, thinned out physically, and even mentally, and emotionally, I find myself to be just a little bit more chilly all the time. And I'm always floating around 90, what is it like? What is our like 90s, like the high 97s? Like I mean, I'm sure like it's nothing major, but I'm just saying like it's
yeah.
what I
Well,
where I live.
Yeah, I mean, and so if you are living in a stress state all the time, if you are you're a high adrenaline person, that can make someone slightly warm initially, especially if you're just kind of consuming, right?
Yeah.
Those can drive breakdown of tissue, which can create heat in a body. So sometimes when people go through a healing phase and they actually get themselves out of that stress cycle and they lower the temperature on your stress hormones, they'll initially feel cool. And so the question is, well, if you're still cool, then could there be work that could be established to get you warmer?
Yep.
Most definitely.
Of
Most
course.
definitely. Right. So
Yeah.
even though, so that could be just part of where you're going in your healing, that eventually could you get yourself warmer and start feeling even absolutely and then in a better place, right? That you'll start all the other things that come along with producing more heat, right? When you just look at what happens chemically with metabolism, you're basically using food, you're breaking it down, and you're creating ATP, water, and carbon dioxide. And the
Well,
ATP part, yeah,
let me ask you this. So one of the other major ways to slow or eliminate the release of estrogen is intermittent fasting. So I'm curious to know how you feel about it, because that's where I mean, I'm not going back to taking these. I'm not taking anything. And so the way for me to really work through this was using that as a technique, and it's not anything excessive, but it is one way to release reduce the release of hormones. And so I'm curious how you feel about intermittent fasting in all this.
yeah. So I'm not a lover of intermittent fasting because we fast every night when we go to sleep. Um,
Exactly.
so that is my intermittent fasting because anytime your body, again, if we look at what stress is, and like I said, we can define it by emotional, physical, or whatnot. But if we look at what it means on just a chemical level and in the physical body, and we create a stress response anytime there's not enough resources for what we're doing,
Okay.
right? So if there's not enough energy, we can create a stress response, right? Our body is always going, well, she doesn't have enough energy, so we're going to create a stress response through, and then that can lead into breakdown of tissue, fat, muscle, whatever, and that will create enough energy to do what you need to do, right? Your
Right.
body always has to keep going. So when we intermittent fast, obviously there's a longer period of time that you're not eating. And if you're trying to do stuff during that period and not fuel yourself, then what you do is you create less of a burden on your GI tract. So that can be seen as a positive. And a lot of people are like, well, I feel better because I don't have such a burden on my GI. I'm not eating as many meals now. So for some people, that does feel better. But ultimately, if you're trying to be really busy and do things through your day and then not eat, ultimately that's not going to look good in the body. And so hormonally, what your body does right now is you're getting older. Um, After you go through menopause, your ovaries basically produce very little estradiol. So in a blood lab, it looks really, really low. But what we can't measure and what they don't measure is tissue estrogen. And that is the where it's going to create the problems. And that is produced under stress through that aromatase enzyme that's going to convert your steroidal hormones to estrogen. And essentially, and I don't know if it's, because I think tamoxifen is an aromatase inhibitor, or I'm not sure the
Yes.
mechanism exactly how it works, but I think that's what it does. So it inhibits that conversion.
Right.
Data shows it doesn't really do that much percentage wise when you look at the big picture of it, but that's how it's essentially working. And so if you can manage, like, well, if you can just manage stress, provide enough energy for your body, that alone is going to inhibit that process.
Yeah.
And so,
That too.
there's,
I mean, that's first and foremost is what that is.
yeah,
And my intermittent fasting is very flows. Sometimes it's very light. And I always try to explain to people that yes, if you stop eating at 6 and you eat at 6 the next morning for breakfast, you've done already 12 hours. You just haven't eaten overnight. It's really not that hard. You know what I mean? Like, people think it's so difficult. I've never been an extremist. I've always been that 3 to 4 meal a day person. This just happens to work for me, and I don't have those intense workouts anymore. Meaning, like, if I was going to be going to Orange Theory and doing 3 to 5 mile runs, I'm going to eat more. But I mean, I'm getting up and I'm walking and I'm going and teaching yoga and I'm doing things like that. And it doesn't create that much. I don't crave that much, food as much as I used to. And I also used to think that I used to overeat. I just ate more than I needed. and I feel better eating less and the right things, like taking certain things out of my diet that just weren't good for me. And so I like to use myself as kind of the guinea pig because I feel like once you've been through something, you look through that telescope way different. Even age, forget it. Like you're now looking at it like totally different. You're not even more survival, but just what does the rest of my life look like? So in comparing my scenario to the average person, does it change? Is it different in your world, like in working on, metabolism? Is it different? Does it matter
Uh,
what you're starting with?
it always matters. Yeah, that's why I always have people log, and certainly, I mean, and I always look at everything. Like, we can look at your entire life as far as all your stressors that involve, because we have to take a big picture approach. If you
Okay.
just want to look at just the food and don't look at anything else, we might get a very minor progress, because it's all intertwined, right? Your food is there to provide you with enough fuel to get through your day. That's what food is there for.
Yeah.
Should taste good, maybe you should enjoy it, but ultimately it's our gasoline to get our body going. And if we limit it to too much or not enough, or the wrong foods, then there's going to be a disruption that can go on in the physical body. So I give you an example. I have actually a client who is a radiologist, and he looks at people that have obviously cancers and all sorts of things going on. But what he's learned to do is actually looks at their all GI function as well. And what he's found is that there's a deep correlation between gut dysfunction and all of these diseases that are going on, and which makes complete sense, because that's our entry fee for all energy and nutrition and so forth. So to me, if that's not functioning optimally in somebody, which I would tell you 95% of the people I work with don't have good GI function, then that's always a place that I go and start with, like improving that. Because if we don't have food that's coming in, or you have malabsorption or whatever, we're not going to have a body that's going to be well nourished. And you've got to be nourished to function optimally. But we do want, right? My goal is to actually teach somebody to utilize as much fuel as possible. Because I know if I can, and maintain weight, right? Not get huge, but maintain weight. Because I know if I can get you really warm and use more energy, then your body has enough fuel to do all its metabolic functions and also to heal. Because healing does take a considerable amount of energy.
Healing. Can you expand on that for a sec?
Well,
Because
any
I
healing.
love that. That's great.
Yeah. So if you look at how your body utilizes energy, you have your metabolic function is over here, this bucket number one, right? And that's everything from breathing to just maintaining muscle mass to detoxification to your nervous system, all of that. That's like 60 to 70% of your energy that comes in. Then we have healing and recovery. And that can be as small as like healing from a workout or healing from a stressful day. It also can be healing from cancer or a surgery or anything, because now the cells are, I mean, if you've had surgery done or something, that takes more fuel to heal that, right? We can't build new cells with no energy. And so that takes us considerable. And then we have what I refer to as the doing bucket. And that's our thinking, even digesting, working, all the things we do. And unfortunately, in our lives and how we utilize the energy, it will prioritize the doing bucket. So if we start doing a lot and we only have X amount of energy coming in, that will get prioritized. And so our body will try to give all the energy to that. And what happens? We lower metabolic function, right? We start seeing symptoms, and then we might not heal as well. And we see that in the aging population. That's what happens to them. They don't heal as well. They don't have as good metabolic function, right? And what do? Their appetite's low. They don't eat as enough. And so could you flip that on them and help them try to eat more? I think so. And that would help them heal, right? But if you have someone that is being busy all the time and doing a lot, and I see it all the time when people get sick, they don't rest, or they have surgery and they kind of try to get back to life immediately. What happens? They don't heal right. They start getting infections. They don't sleep. And I'm like, you gotta stop. You can't keep doing that.
Yeah.
Right. And people are so hard-headed. Well, no, I have to. And then I'm like, okay, well, then you're not going to heal. So there you go. And we've seen it. So if you're young, you can probably get away with it. As you age, it isn't going to work for you. And so
Yeah.
you have to start building that foundation back. You can. And I think you can do it at any age. You can improve it. You just got to know that there's different decisions that you have to make when you're living a healthy and healing life than you are living a crazy and chaotic life.
Okay. So my last question, what would you say to somebody who's considering kind of working on their lifestyle or their health in this manner and, focusing on the metabolism?
Well, I'd probably say go read my book, How to Heal Your Metabolism. And that will give you honestly the biggest understanding of it in one space.
And what's the name
Because
of the book?
it's called How to Heal Your Metabolism.
Okay.
So that is a way that's very easy to digest and will give you a different understanding, because what you've been told in the health space, in my opinion, isn't helping and not getting people healthier, because
Right.
I see it all the time. And
Okay.
so this approach is, you have to unlearn a lot of things you might have learned. And
Okay.
so that alone is the space where, but essentially, look, I'm like, go write down everything you think you have an issue with, all your symptoms, like think
Yeah.
of all your systems, and that's GI. Do you have any GI dysfunction, right? Do you have PMS issues? Do you have a sex drive? Are you having infertility issues? Do you feel like you have brain fog? Are you sleeping well? Do you feel like your energy is all over the place, or you have kind of lulls? How is your mood? How's your nails? How's your hair? How's your skin? Do you have a lot of bloating? All of those things. And people go, yep, 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 yep. Okay. Then you've got some dysfunction going on. And
Okay.
so then we have to unwind that and go, all right, here's where, and then go into Chronometer, kind of do an app, see how much you're eating, what are the macros, and then kind of start learning where the foods that you need to eat, how you should eat them, and so forth. It is a paradigm shift. So it's a lot. We could do a 10-hour podcast on it and we'd
Yeah.
still have a lot of things to go over. And so that always gives people a foundation of like what they should be doing. And sometimes people make little changes and they're like, oh my God, I can't believe how much better I feel.
That's
But
great.
it's not a quick weight loss approach. It
No,
is none of those things.
I know.
It is
I agree.
healing and nourishment kind of protocol.
Well, I would love to, well, first of all, thank you for today. I think that we've covered a lot. And like you said, it's not it's a relearn in some of the basic forms of life, right? Because sometimes people have certain tendencies, or like the whole period thing, it goes back to when I was in high school. So if it's happening to me when I'm in my 20s and 30s, you're like, dude, this has just happened to me my whole life. It's me, and I hear women talk about it. So, but long and short is, thank you for this to get the conversation started. And what I'd love to do is, maybe in the future have you come back and we'll talk about some other segments of this. And
Yeah, yeah.
because I think that the more we can educate people, the more they can be aware of these types of situations. The words are, symptoms, I guess, is what we're looking for. And we're not diagnosing, but when somebody becomes more aware of their body and what it's telling them, sometimes people just don't even know what they're looking for.
That's
So
right.
thank you
That's right.
for that, the start of that conversation today. Would love to have you back sometime and dig into some of this deeper. But it makes me feel good that there's people out there like you who, it's being, looking in yourself, saying, I went through these things and I wanted to learn more and I learned more and I'm sharing this. And that, I think, is really impactful when I see women, men, people of any age, really, dig deep on their own. I call myself a science project, right? Like, just trying to
Absolutely.
do the best I can.
That's right. That's right.
But thank you so much.